Hi, this is Richard Vague from Tycos. Quarterly economic press releases related to debt frequently use terms like higher or record or increase or surpassing or even record highs. Implicit in these is kind of a tisk-tisk or a head shaking or kind of an oh my god implicit message. But since all forms of debt are almost always growing, it would be a great surprise if debt did not continue to increase, and usually, by definition, that means a record. The better question is the rate of debt growth compared to GDP. Did it grow as fast or faster than economic growth generally? And that's rarely addressed in these press releases. So let's look at a recent example. New York, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York Center for Microeconomic Data today issued its quarterly report on household debt and credit. The report shows an increase in total household debt in the fourth quarter of 2022, increasing by $394 billion to $16.9 trillion. Balances now stand $2.75 trillion higher than at the end of 2019, before the pandemic recession. The report is based on the New York Fed's nationally representative Consumer Credit Panel. It continues. Mortgage balances rose by $254 billion in the fourth quarter of 2022 and stood at $11.92 trillion at the end of December, marking a nearly $1 trillion increase in mortgage balances in 2022. Credit card balances increased by $61 billion in the fourth quarter to $986 billion, surpassing the pre-pandemic high of $927 billion. It goes on to talk about autos and student. So how should we interpret this? Note every number, good or bad, is likely to be a record when it is announced. That's kind of the way our economy has been growing. We should expect private sector loans to grow at roughly the same pace as GDP itself, lest it would be contractionary in impact. To make sense of this, we have to normalize it. The best way to do that is to divide it by some factor. Most likely GDP is the best. So let's do that. Household debt in the fourth quarter of 2022 increased to $16.9 trillion. That's $2.75 trillion higher than the end of 2019, before the pandemic recession. However, as a percent of GDP, it has declined from 64.6% of GDP from 65.2%, meaning debt has grown slightly slower than the economy. It goes on to read that mortgage balances in the fourth quarter of 2022 stood at $11.92 trillion at the end of December, up $1 trillion from December of 2021. That's a small bump from 44.9% to 45.6%, which you'd expect given the pandemic housing boom, but it's not nearly enough to be alarmed about here. High current mortgage rates will likely curb this growth in any event. Then it goes on to read that credit card balances increased to $986 billion at the end of 2022, surpassing the pre-pandemic high of $927 billion. Shocking, right? But in ratio to GDP, it has actually declined quite a bit, from 4.3% to 3.8% of GDP. It goes on to speak to student loans, auto loans, and all non-mortgage household debt, which are collectively and separately slightly down on a percentage basis to GDP in this time frame. So remember this the next time you see a hint of alarmism in a debt-related headline. The reporters have not normalized those numbers for GDP. So take it with a grain of salt. We at Tycos normalize our data as a matter of course. You can always check out that at data@tycosgroup.org. And we will certainly tell you in these videos if there a trend emerges that you should be alarmed about. That's it for this week.